Hey guys, welcome back to a new Jetpack Compose tutorial here, in which we will make this simple timer, which has this little arc here. And if we click start, guess what happens? Well, the progress bar, or whatever you want to call it, will just, don't know how to call it, but the timer will get less and less. It's just a normal timer. We can click on stop, we can click start, and when it completely runs out, then we have the option to restart the timer. So that is what we want to do here. I click stop, I jump into Android Studio in an empty Jetpack Compose project. I suggest you to do the same, so we can jump right into it. So let's actually take a look back here and see what kind of data we need to display this specific timer. On the one hand, we want to have the color for this bar when it's active, so this green color here. Then we want to be able to specify the color for this dot, which is just a little bit more green than this bar. We want to be able to specify a color for this inactive bar, so the time that already ran out. We want to be able to specify a total time, so just the starting time this timer will start from. We want to be able to specify an initial value. So usually we don't need this in for a timer, but we could still specify that so that we start at somewhere here, for example. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. And we could also specify an initial value here, which usually doesn't make that much sense with a timer because we usually always start at the very end. But just to have that functionality, we could also just start somewhere here or here, whatever we like. And one last parameter we need is the stroke width, so how thick we want our bar to be. So let's jump into it and create a composable for our timer. Composable, no, I have it, called timer. And as I said, this will take a bunch of parameters. So we will have the total time, which will be a long. We will have a handle color, which will be the color of the little circle we have. So that will be a compose color here that we import in this one here. We have an inactive bar color, so the gray one. We have an active bar color, which will be the green color. And then we want to be able to pass a modifier that I will set to the default modifier. Then we want to be able to specify that initial value I talked about, which is a float, and I'll set it to 0f by default. And finally the stroke width, which will be a dp value, is equal to 5 dp by default. Want to import dp, and now we can jump right into this composable. We want to start specifying some kind of state first. We need 4 different states here. On the one hand, for the size of our whole composable, why we put that in a state, you will see that in a second. Let's do by remember, and that will be immutable state of and int size dot 0 actually initially. So because when we actually create the box our timer will be located in, then we can use the modifier function of that box called onSizeChanged, which, well, will be called when the size of our composable changes. And in that function, we just get the bounds of our composable, and we can update the state. Then we want to scroll up to get rid of this error. Open this import block, duplicate remember twice, and import set value and get value instead. And then the error should be gone. Then we want to have a variable, a state, for the value, which will be the percentage value of our timer. So if we take a look here, then, well, our timer started at 100. So at this point, our value would be 0.77, so 77%. Just what kind of percentage is currently filled in our timer. So, by remember, and here we start with 1f, I would say. Actually not 1f, because we want to start at our initial value. So we could also start at 50% or whatever we like. Then we will have a state for the current time, so the actual time in milliseconds we are currently at. By remember, that will be a mutable state of initially of our total time. And last but not least, what kind of state do we miss here? We miss if our timer is actually running. So is timer running? And initially this will be false, so we need to start it manually. Then next, we want to have a box in which we will put all of our stuff. So we create a box here, and first, I want to give it a content alignment of center, and we're going to give it a modifier in which we'll actually retrieve the bounds of our composable, as I said. So modify that onSize changed, which is the function I talked about. So whenever the size of this composable changes, you can see we get this new size in form of an int size. So we can set our size equal to it here. And then let's start with the more complicated part, which is actually drawing this arc here. So drawing this arc and drawing this handle. That is more complicated because for that we need some kind of math and a canvas. So let's create the canvas first. The modifier of that canvas is just our modifier we pass as a parameter, and let's actually also pass this here, so a lower m. And in here we can draw something called an arc. An arc is basically just a part of a circle, and that is exactly what we want to draw here. So let's open this function. This will take a color. The color will be our inactive bar color. So we will essentially draw two arcs. One arc will be this inactive bar, so the gray one, and one will be for the green one that we will just decrease over time. The starting angle is start angle is minus 215f, which I just played around with until it looks good. So that just means I think normally it starts here. So here would be the E angle 0, and minus 215 would be here. So that is where this value comes from. And now we have to specify the sweep angle as well. So from the starting angle, for how many degrees we actually want this arc to be long, and that will be 250 degrees in our case. So sweep angle 250f. Then we want to set use center to false. What this will do is it will prevent that the ends of our arc will be connected to the center. So it would basically be a pi normally, but in our case we don't want this, so we set it to false. Then we have the top left, which is an offset, and that is already defaulted to offset at 0, so just the offset 0 and 0. So we actually want to leave it at that, so we don't even need this, but we want to specify a size. So how big should this arc be? And here we can create this size object, and that is now what our size state is actually useful for. So we say size.width dot to float and size.height dot to float. And finally, once you give this arc a style, so we set this to a stroke, and in here we can set the stroke width. So our stroke width we pass as a parameter because we have it in dp. This function needs it in pixels. We can call that 2 pixel on that. And we're going to set the cap to stroke cap dot round. So what this will do is it will just make sure that the ends of our arc are round, which I think looks much better. Then we can copy this draw arc function because we want to draw a second one, which will be the green one. So the active bar color. The starting angle will be the same, so it will start at the very same point as our gray bar. But the sweep angle will now differ because depending on what our time is, the sweep angle will get less and less. So initially it will also be 250f, but only initially. And when it actually gets less, we want to multiply that by our value, which is the current percentage of our time in relation to the total time. So that's it for our arc, and that will work now. But what is missing is actually this handle. And for that, we now actually need to calculate the corresponding position in our canvas. So the X and the Y value for each single step is something we need to know now. And that is a little bit more difficult than it might look like at first, because we don't get this position from our arc or something like that. Instead, we need to calculate it on our own. And the way this will work is, well, we actually know the center of our circle, which is actually also just the center of our canvas. And we also know the angle here that handle is actually in relation to our center. So that we know this angle and we know the radius, because the radius is essentially just half of our canvas's size. And with these values, we can actually calculate this distance, so the X distance from our center to this handle, and the Y distance from our center to our handle. And that is what we want to do now. First of all, the center of our coordinate system will be an offset size.width divided by 2f and size.height divided by 2f, so just the center. And our angle, which I will call beta, will be set to 250f, which is our total sweep angle, multiplied by our value, and we're going to add 145 degrees on top of that, which again is something I just played around with, and that is the value that now fits. And because this is now a degree in, degree format and not in radians, but we now need to calculate a little bit with sine and cosine, and these functions want the degree to be in radians, so that is why we need to convert that. So we multiply it by pi divided by 180f, and we convert that to a float. So now we have actually the angle between our center and this handle, and with that we can now calculate the side length here, and then we can just take the X and Y position of our center and add these side lengths on top of that. First of all, our radius will be our size.width divided by 2f, and then we'll have our two sides A and B. A will be equal to cosine of our angle times the radius, and B will be equal to sine of beta times radius. Do we need to import sine here? Yes, we do. This one, and then this should work. So now, since we're still in the canvas, we can use draw points to just draw a point here. We could potentially draw multiple points here, but we just want to draw one. We still need to specify that in a list in form of an offset. And the offset will be our center.x plus our side A and center.y plus our side B. So again, to show you what that now means, center.x is here, and our side A is basically the difference from this handle's x and our center x, so this side length here. And if we now take our center x and add this side A on top of that, we're here. And if we then do the same for our side y, or side B, sorry, then we're actually at the very point this handle is currently at. So I hope that makes sense. What do we else need here? The point mode, which is just point mode at points. Oops. So we want to draw points here, nothing special. The color will be equal to our handle color, and then we have the stroke width, which I will set to our stroke width we pass as a parameter, and I will multiply that with 3f, and convert it to pixels. So just that our handle is always a little bit bigger than our bar width. And we want to set the stroke cap to stroke cap.round again. So we actually have a circle here and not a square. And that's it for our canvas. Now the rest of the UI is missing, so the text that displays the current time and the button, and actually the functionality that our time is actually decreasing over time. So outside of our canvas, we use a text. Now we want to create the text that displays the current time. And the text of that will just be our current time divided by 1000, because our current time will be in milliseconds. We want to display it in seconds, not toString. Then let's set the font size to 44 SP, import SP. The font weight will be bold, and the color of the text will be color.white. You could also make that a variable and pass that as a parameter, but I will leave that here. And then we only lack this button with which we can actually toggle the timer. This will take an onClick function, but for now let's ignore that, because I want to add a modifier to that, because the button should be aligned in the bottom center. So we say modify align bottom center. And we want to change, how's it called, button colors or just colors? Yes, just colors. And here we need to pass button colors, because a button can have multiple different colors depending on if it's pressed, if it's not pressed, if it's disabled, and stuff like that. I want to have a green button here when the timer is actually not running, and when it's running I want to have a red button to just display a stop button. So we can say button defaults dot button colors. Oops, that is nothing I want here. Let's remove this. Yeah, seems to work. And here we can specify the background color, the content color, the disabled background color, and yeah. I will actually ignore the disabled stuff here and only care about the background color and the content color. Or actually only about the background color, because the content color will be just the text view that we will display in that button. So if our timer is actually running, or if the current time is less than or equal to 0L, so if the timer is actually already at the very end, then we want this color to be equal to color green. And else, that means the timer is, let's do it this way. So if the timer is not running or the current time is actually less than or equal to 0, that means we are actually stopping the timer. So the timer is currently stopped, and we can now resume it. Or if it's if the time ran out, then that means we can now restart it, and then the button color should also be green. Else, that means the timer is running and the time is greater than 0. We want to use color.red instead. And then in here, for the content, we can use a simple text. And here we will again check if now our timer is running and the current time is greater than or equal to 0. In that case, let's do it in one line. We want the text to be stop. So that means, hey, the timer is running and we have some time left, then the text should display stop. Else if the timer is not running and the current time is greater than or equal to 0, that means we're now at the very start of our timer, or we actually paused it. So then we want to set this text to start. And else, that means the timer is actually at the time 0, so it totally ran out, and then we just want to set the text to restart. And I get an error here because I set a comma here. Okay, now the error's gone. Let's format that a little bit. And that is actually looking fine. Let's worry about this onClick function when we click on our button. So when we click on it and the current time is less than or equal to 0L, then that means we want to restart the timer. So we set current time equal to our total time, and we want to set is timer running to true. So now we're running the timer again, and else if we click on this button and the time is not equal to 0, then we just want to toggle the timer state. So is timer running is equal to is timer running negated. And now the only thing that is missing for this timer is the functionality to actually make the timer tick. I want to do that right on top of this box. And for that, I want to use something called a launched effect. So in case you haven't watched my Compose Basics playlist or you just didn't understand it, launched effect is a so-called effect handler. So what it will do is it will take a key and it will give us a block here that we can actually write as a lambda function. So you can see this gives us a coroutine scope. So we can call suspend functions instead of this block. What Compose will do is whenever the key here, whatever we pass for the key, whenever that changes, it will rerun this code. So what we can do now is we can say, okay, the key is our current time, and we can pass a second key. So also when the second key changes, this code will run again. The second key is timer running. And now instead of this launched effect block, we can say if the current time is greater than 0 and our timer is actually running, then we want to delay this coroutine by 100 milliseconds. We want to subtract 100 milliseconds from our current time, and we set our value, so the percentage value of our handle, equal to our current time divided by total time to float. So essentially what will happen here is we say, okay, whenever our current time changes or whenever our timer running boolean changes, rerun this code again. And initially this will also be called. So initially we will check is our current time greater than 0, which is the case initially, and our timer running is not the case initially. It will be the case when we click on our button, then our timer will start to be running. So when we click on our button, this changes, which will make this block fire off again. It will go inside of this if condition, delay the coroutine for 100 milliseconds, then subtract 100 milliseconds of our current time, and after that just update our value. And because we change our current time here inside of this launched effect block, this will trigger this block again because that is one of our keys. And unless our current time is equal to 0 or our timer is not running, it will keep doing that, similar to a while true loop in which we use the delay function. And now the last thing we want to do here is just to go inside of our set content function and create a surface just to fill our screen with our favorite color, which is in my case, let's do like this, just color 0xFF101010, which is the gray tone I always use. And the modifier should be modified at fill max size. And then in here, in the surface, we can say we have a box with content alignment center, and also modifier to fill the max size. Actually, I think we don't even need this, so let's remove it. The content alignment should be fine because I think the stuff here is already centered by default. Let's just try it out. In here we will then create our timer. The total time being, let's do it 100 seconds, so we need to pass that in milliseconds, 100L times 1000L. And let's also move these into separate lines. The handle color will be colored at green. The inactive bar color will be colored at dark gray. The active bar color is something I will paste here, just a slightly darker green than our handle color. And for the modifier, we want to pass a size, so modifier that size 200 dp. And that is it. I think I also need to change the version here in our build at Gradle project file, because Android Studio keeps creating Compose Beta 07, which always crashes for me. We want to have Compose Beta 08 and also update this Gradle plugin to 1.5.10, synchronize the changes, and then when that is done, we can run our app and hopefully everything should work. So let's see. It launches and okay, the handler is at position 0, which is not what we want. And when we click start, okay, then it works. But why does it start at position 0. The initial value is 0 by default. Let's change that to 1 better. So relaunch the app, and yes, now it works. So I was just verifying if the initial value works, of course. Yeah, so that is our timer app. We click start, the timer starts, stop, the timer stops, and so on and so forth. So thank you for watching this far. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're looking for more advanced Android premium courses, check out this video's description. The first link, basically, it will lead you to my website where you will see my advanced Android courses that will take your Android skills to the next level. And these are also a brilliant way to support me and my work here. I wish you an amazing day. See you in the next video again. Bye bye.